You've lost a couple of days.
This is an interview with Mr. Al Leeland on October 7th, 1993. The interviewer is Lorraine McConaughey. This is tape number 1 for Mr. Leeland in the Kirkland Local History Project series. Let me begin by asking you about your growing up in Redmond. What was it like, your boyhood?
Well, we had lived on Magnolia Bluff, and we're initially in my real young years. We lived on Magnolia Bluff in Seattle, and I remember growing up in what is Magnolia Bluff and Carlton Park, and I remember the old dairy that used to be up at the head of the valley, and which is all business district now, and it was quite rural in that immediate area. And then my folks bought this ranch in Redmond up on Union Hill. And I think I was about 6 years old. And it was a dairy ranch. And we had Golden Guernseys, which is a brand or a breed of cows, milk cows. And my dad became involved in a logging operation over on Cases Inlet. This is over across the bay from Allen. And I remember my two brothers and I, during the summer months when our school was out, that we would go over to there. This is when they were actively logging, and they had this big bunkhouse, and at night when we would sleep in the bunkhouse, the men would scratch the wall to make it rattle, and of course we were little kids, and what's that? And they'd say, that's a mink weasel. How big is a mink weasel? Oh, bigger than a horse. And of course that's all it took, you know, to scare the devil out of us. But I remember this so vividly because this was going on while we had the ranch at Redmond. And we had a total of 80 acres at one time, and I wish I could tell you the name of the party that has the ranch now, but
You mean the acreage is still together in its entirety?
well, not the total 80 acres, but I imagine the 240s are. And as you start up the Novelty Hill Road from the valley, and you cross Bear Creek and you start up the hill, you keep to the right and you start up the hill, there's this big red barn. Can't miss it. And that was our place. And there was a little creek in the ravine that's alongside the road. It was Mackey Creek, and I used to catch the most wonderful trout out of that you'd ever believe. And we grew up on that ranch, and we had just about everything. We had, first of all, we had a wide range of fruit trees. And we had cattle, of course. We raised our own beef. We had hogs. We raised our own hogs. We had sheep. We had chickens. So we had and of course we had all the milk products because we had a dairy. And
What was the name of your dairy?
well, I don't remember, and I don't think there's anybody around that could tell me now.
But you guys.
But my dad actually had a milk route in Kirkland and Redmond,
Right.
house to house, and.
Well, what was his profession before he made this move to the east side? It's interesting to me.
He'd have been a timber broker.
He'd been
I mean, that's what I recall. The first thing I recall, he had been a timber broker. And I think that might have been how he wound up in logging this particular tract. He had it, and perhaps he bought it or couldn't move it or one thing or another, and he wound up with it and had to log it. And of course, we're starting into the Depression by this time. And
so the fruit trees that you described, this is not an old homestead. These were new trees that your family put in.
No. This was an established ranch, and the barn and everything was there when we bought it. And I might, at a later date, I might remember, and I'll tell you the name of the people. I remember the immediate neighbors to the north was Stray, and there was another Kling, that was across the road, and I remember those because strays raised strawberries, and I used to go pick strawberries when I was a kid, and raspberries, and I think I told you earlier that I used to pick the little wild blackberries and carry them to Redmond and peddle them house to house for 15 cents a box. And
you mentioned trapping too.
yes, I got started early. It's funny because I got interested in trapping, and I started trapping about in early fall one year, and it wasn't legally open for about 2 months after that. So a lot of the furs that I initially caught, these were muskrat and some mink, were not totally prime. But by the end of the season, I had quite a catch of muskrats, and I had 4 or 5 mink, which is about all you would expect to catch in a normal season. And I remember my folks took them into the Seattle Fur Exchange, which is still in business. And they bought them, and they showed her all around and showed me around the establishment, and I don't remember how many muskrats I had, but I know they got a check for something like $140 or $50,
Wow.
which was an awful lot of money in those days. And I trapped every year for years thereafter, and I trapped muskrat and mink, and at one time or another, I trapped the Sammamish slough from one end to the other. I trapped Bear Creek from one end to the other. I trapped Evans Creek. I trapped Ames Lake. I trapped Cottage Lake. You name it.
How do you care for the furs? What must you do to keep them from rotting?
Well, you skin them. As rapidly, usually you take them home, and then that night while you would skin them, and you put them on boards that are, in many instances for muskrat you could use shingles, because it's a wide, and you stretch them, the fur in and the hide out. The fleshy part of the hide out, and it doesn't take too many days. And of course once they're properly stretched and dried, you can take the form off and use it for another animal.
Are they stiff? The
Oh yeah,
skins?
yeah, they're stiff.
They're rigid.
And
So
of course,
they're
there's no
made
bones in
pliant.
it. We're only talking about fur
Mm-hmm.
and the skin. And you can stack them up like hotcakes.
Hardwood, yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and they trapping used to be very important, and it still is in some countries, and it still is as far as the Indians go in Canada and some portions of Alaska, particularly things like muskrat, which has been a staple fur for years, you know.
And Mr. Leeland, you were earning decent money trapping and also picking these wild blackberries. Was this just for pleasure, for pocket money, or was your family struggling?
Well, no, my folks put the money in a savings account, and it wasn't my prerogative to go draw it out and spend it. I think we got what might have amounted to about a nickel a week in those days, which was still quite a bit of money. You could buy a pretty nice candy bar for a nickel in those days. And I remember one time I went into the account was in the old bank at Redmond, and I went in one time and into a hardware store, and I needed a hunting knife and for skinning one thing or another, and I found a knife I admired very much, and I went over to the bank and I drew out money and went and bought it. And when I got home with the knife, I got the tar whaled out of me. Because I wasn't supposed to do that, but that was normal procedure in those days for all kids. And so I was very active, and then in the spring I'd peel cascara bark, and as I say, pick little wild blackberries. And for farms, I picked raspberries and strawberries and stuff.
You girdle a tree to...
I'm sorry.
How did you get the cascara bark, and what's it used for, and where did you sell it?
Well, incidentally, they still peel cascara bark, and if you go down into counties like Grays Harbor County and Elma, for example, you'll see signs up, "We buy cascara bark," dried or wet. And it's a tree, and you would normally wouldn't peel probably any tree that was much less than that big around. And you'd get permission from the landowner. Of course, we had some cascara on our own land, of course, but usually it grows in the valleys in a semi-swampy condition, that type of tree. And you peel the bark, and you start down on one side, and it peels very easily. And you slit it on one side, and with the knife you get it started, and then you can just take your hands and go up and go down and go around. You have to be a little careful because there are, like where knots or one thing or another are sharp, so you be careful. And you wind up with sheets that, it depends on the tree, because you can't go up around a limb, that would be the outside of what the extent of how high or how low, whatever the case was. But you would oftentimes get sheets of in those days, I don't know that you can today, but in those days you could get sheets that might be as much as 3 feet long, and once it was spread out, why, maybe 2-3 feet around.
And it wouldn't kill the tree?
Pardon?
It wouldn't kill the tree?
Yes, it does kill the tree when you do when you do it that way. Yes, it does. But other trees were coming along all the time. And then, as far as selling it, there were regular places that bought it, and they paid you. Normally, in those days, you would dry it, and you would sell it by the pound. And it was just like bringing in eggs and selling them to the grocer. I mean, there was a ready market for it, and it was used by the drug companies primarily to make laxative. And I don't know if you ever heard of sassafras tea or not, but that's in effect the kind of a home remedy. They'd make it into sassafras tree for a variety of home uses.
Now, were you going to school? What
Oh, yeah.
age? Are you in junior high or elementary?
No, I was in grade school in Redmond, and went to, my recollection is that, and I couldn't off the top of my head tell you the year, but my recollection is I was about 8 or 9. I guess that's about when you start junior high, isn't it?
No, not quite. 7th grade, kids are usually 12.
Well, about the time we, let me say this, let's go back to the ranch. One of the curses of a dairy herd in those days was what they called Bang's disease. And when it was discovered, why, and as I recall, you didn't get paid any for it, but the state would come in and kill the herd to attempt to eradicate the disease. And shortly after, Osman, that was the name of the people that owned the ranch we bought, Osman. And of course I was just a young person at the time, but the ranch did not turn out to be what it was represented to be. And of course, I'm trying to remember now what discussions I heard and one thing or another at that time, but there was some question as to, in my parents' mind apparently, as to whether or not the settlers were not aware of the Bang disease.
So the Bangs disease was in the grass, or?
No, it was in the cattle.
Oh, your parents bought the cattle, they bought everything, I see.
And and then there was, it's a sloping hilly land, and it over the years it had been, a lot of erosion had taken place, and the fields were not capable of producing what they were represented to produce in hay and that sort of thing. So ultimately there was a lawsuit, and my folks won the lawsuit and were awarded a judgment for a considerable amount of money, never collected a penny of it. They had, the owners of or the relatives or the descendants, whatever the case may be, I don't know now, had signed everything away and one thing and another, and there was never a penny recovered. In the meantime, somewhere along the line, they bought the adjoining 40 acres. But the outcome was that my folks eventually lost that 40 acres for the buildings and where the ranch was. And we built a combination living quarters and barn on the other property. And we lived there for some years. And then, about the time I would be in junior high, my folks moved to Kirkland. And I started junior high, I remember, in Kirkland. And then...
What kind of a place did they buy in Kirkland? Was it another one of these dairy ranch?
No, in Kirkland. This was the building at 7th and Market that is now the Creative Arts. You know what I'm talking about?
The Creative Arts League building, one of the original Peter Kirk brick
Right,
buildings.
that's correct, that's correct.
They
And
bought that building to
my
live
dad bought
in?
that, and he started a grocery store. He had a grocery store in Yakima one time. He started a grocery store and meat market, one thing and another, and was making a living at it. And somewhere along the way, my mother and my father separated. And my mother moved to Seattle up on Capitol Hill, and I was young enough, I went with her. And both my brothers were out of school by that time, and but I went through junior high in Kirkland, I remember that, and I entered Broadway High School in Seattle. And I went to Broadway for about a year, and then that was the end of my formal education.
When did you leave Broadway High School? Do you know what year it was?
Well, it must have been about in that 38, 39 range, because my brother, I had two brothers, but my middle brother John, there were three of us boys. There was 2 years and 2 weeks difference in our ages. All of our birthdays were in September, 7, 14, and 21. And this was my brother John. He entered and joined the Army Air Corps. And that sounded pretty good to me. And so I decided I wanted to try to enlist. I was old enough, but I think I was 17. And 17 or 18, but I think it was 17. But at that stage, you had to have a high school education to join the Army Air Corps. And my mother talked to various people and found that it was possible to get a waiver if you could convince them that they should enlist you. And between my mother and myself, we were able to convince them that I should be given the waiver.
Why had you decided to leave high school?
Well, it was very tough. You know, there wasn't many jobs to be found. And I remember I was always the one that wanted the education, and I wanted music lessons. From our Magnolia Bluff days, my mother had a baby grand piano, and my two older brothers both got music lessons. My older brother learned to play quite well. My middle brother learned to play reasonably, although it was very mechanic because he hated it. The only one that really wanted music lessons was myself, and by the time I reached that point, the Depression and one thing and another such just prohibited it. It was impossible to do it. So I never had any. As a result, I can't carry a tune in a bucket.
So are you saying you left high school to support your mother? Is that what you're saying?
No. I left high school for something to do and get started doing something that was creative and productive. And I joined the Air Corps, and the Army Air Corps. It was Army Air Corps in those days. And I was sent to Moffett Field in California. And we been there, I guess. Moffett Field was on the Navy Air Base that had taken care of the dirigibles. And they had a huge hangar there. It was famous because from time to time a Navy pilot would fly the plane right through the hangar from one end to the other. That was a no-no.
Yes, I can imagine, but very tempting.
Anyway, we were there, less than, I suppose somewhere in the 6 months to 8 months, 10 months, something like that. And we were assigned, because that was kind of a holding, receiving center for the Army Air Corps, and we were assigned to the 17th Bomb Group, which had been stationed at March Field in California, and 2 squadrons of the 17th Group were sent to open McCord Air Base. That's when I remember the dedication by Governor Martin of McCord Air Base. And we were not too long at McCord Field when several of us were sent to the Boeing School of Aeronautics down at the Oakland Municipal Airport, which was named for Boeing in honor, but it was owned and operated by United Airlines. And we were the first group of Army trainees to go to a privately owned school. Previously, everybody that was trained, in aviation, whatever field of aviation, was sent to Chanute Field in Illinois, I think it was, or Indiana.
C-H-A-N-U-T-E.
Pardon?
C-H-A-N-U-T-E.
Yeah.
Chanute.
And while we finished school, and it was airplane mechanic school, and we got back to McCord Field, and I don't remember whether the squadron had already gone north or whether we joined them and then almost immediately went north to Elmendorf Field, and we opened Elmendorf Field in Anchorage, Alaska. Mm-hmm. And the first 2 winters, we didn't have hangars. We operated right off the ice.
Now, is this still before Pearl Harbor?
Yes.
Yes.
But we were at Elmendorf Field when the Japanese hit Pearl Harbor.
How did you hear that news? What was that like?
Well, it was very shocking, of course. And it was doubly shocking because a lot of people don't know. We had old B-18 bombers. That's what we had in the squadron. And that's the military version of the C-47 transport plane.
Yeah, I was going to say, I've never heard that designation.
Yeah, well, that's what it would be, B-18, but that's was the military version of the old C-47 transport plane. And the Japanese, you know, made a feint towards Alaska. They did actually hit Dutch Harbor. And our planes were pressed into service. And I'll never forget the first day they came back because there were people all shot up. And
now, are we talking about the day of Pearl Harbor or not?
Yes, yes.
Yes, okay.
And they took those slow-moving planes and hung torpedoes on them and used them for torpedo runs against the Japanese fleet.
Yeah.
And we subsequently opened all of the Aleutian bases. I spent, I guess more than 4 years in Alaska and the Aleutians. And which was a whole experience in itself.
You practically must have grown up there.
Well, to a large extent, yes, because I was a crew chief and an aerial engineer, and had an interesting experience. I was due for reassignment to the United States, and we had gone to Alaska in an old smelly troop ship, and nobody wanted that experience again, you know. And so I'd heard that, you know, if you claimed you had business to do in Anchorage, because we'd been in Anchorage for some time, why you could go back to the States via Anchorage. So some of us put in for that and was granted it. So we were sitting around on Umnak Island waiting. At that time we were assigned to the group. We're not in our squadron anymore. It's the 73rd Bomb Squadron. And gives you some idea of the age of that, or the origin of that squadron, the 73rd Bomb Squadron, numerically. In fact, General Hap Arnold had been the squadron commander at one time.
Oh, is that right?
Of that particular outfit.
Right.
And so we were assigned a group waiting for air transportation back to Anchorage. And another, I think it was the 77th Bomb Squadron, needed a couple of radio operators and an aerial engineer and one thing or other to go ferry some planes down. So we finally got off. We'd been waiting 2 or 3 weeks. That's how bad the weather was at that particular time. We got by this time we had B-26 bombers, not the old B-18s. We had B-26, and the Germans called them the flying coffins. That's about what they looked like. And it took a very experienced pilot to fly them if you lost one engine. And everything was on it was hydraulic, including the emergency lowering of the landing gear. And we're flying from Umnak to Anchorage, and our hydraulic accumulator blew up, and we lost all the hydraulic power. And they wouldn't let us fly onto Anchorage because the weather was turning bad, and the gas supply would not permit us to turn around then and get back anywhere. So we did this was in January, we did a belly landing at Naknek, and it was 30 below zero on the ground. and they made us, and we were all dressed in civilian clothes. See, we were just passengers on this plane. This is not, I'm talking about two different things now. I'm talking, we went up and ferried the planes down, and then we're waiting for air flight back to Anchorage to go back to the States. And it's on that flight that we blew the hydraulic accumulator, and everybody, you know, those were just passengers on the plane. We were just dressed in civilian clothes. And they made us take all the windows out and throw them out, so there wouldn't be any question of getting out after we completed the belly landing. And they
Must have been pretty scary.
it got really cold, and everybody got, you know, some frostbite, one thing or another. They tell me that I ran the first 100 yards out of that window on my hands and knees. But and then we were stuck there about another 2 weeks before the weather cleared enough that they could get us up to Anchorage. But then I got back to the States in good shape. But I probably led you far afield.
Well, we need to get you to Europe and to the Normandy invasions, and
Well,
then back to Kirkland.
we were assigned, mind you now, we'd been in Alaska in the Aleutians for several years. And so where did we get assigned to? Tampa, Florida. Ultimate assignment around. And we eventually were assigned to an outfit in we were at Lakeland, Florida for a while, and then we were assigned to an outfit at Will Rogers Field in Oklahoma. And there we had B-25s, and there's the plane we flew, and I was a crew chief and aerial engineer. And then the outfit was moved to Muskogee, Oklahoma, and then later to Lowell, Mississippi, and then later we went overseas. And as I think I told you previously, when I was in England, I was assigned to the Pathfinder squadron.
What did the Pathfinder do? That triangulation?
Well, there were three squadrons of Pathfinder planes in the Allies. The British Air Force had one, the U.S. 8th Air Force had one, and the 9th Air Force, which I was in, had one. And the Pathfinder planes were one of the hush-hush secrets of the war at that time. They had, it was triangulation radio bombing. And they would send out a radio beam from, say, Scotland, and another radio beam from southern England, and they would make them intersect over various targets. And a fixed plane would fly over these targets and get they would arrange the coordination of the intersection of these two radio beams over a given target. And the Pathfinders normally only flew in very terrible weather or at night. And one or two Pathfinder planes would lead perhaps a whole group, perhaps one squadron, but depending on the target, or maybe several squadrons of bombers. And the Pathfinder plane would be, as it flew, would pick up side signals from each beam. And when they got directly over the target, they would get the signal that they were there.
Yes.
And the Pathfinder plane would drop either bombs or flares. And all the other squadrons of planes would come in behind them and pattern bomb. And they took out bridges and some very important targets. And the most interesting thing that I remember about that whole thing was when when the Battle of the Bulge took place. It had been terrible weather. You could, just like pea soup.
Mm-hmm.
You couldn't see 100 feet. And that lasted many days. And the Pathfinder's planes had never flew other than these special missions. When the weather finally cleared, it was like bluebird weather. There wasn't a cloud in the sky.
Mm-hmm.
And the Allies put every plane they could get into the air, and including the Pathfinder bombers. But in the first day or day and a half, we got 6 or 7 of them shot down. Mm-hmm. And they grounded our squadron because they didn't want those planes to fall into enemy hands in the first place, and they didn't want to lose because there wasn't that many of the Pathfinder planes.
And what was your specific task
I was
on the Pathfinder?
I was a crew chief, mm-hmm. And we were using A-26s in that particular field. And you talk about D-Day. We were stationed at Braintree in southern England, and I'll never forget the D-Day. The sky was literally black with Allied planes, and literally black with planes towing the gliders for the troops.
That's it. That's it.
Oh, they were they just kept coming and coming and coming and coming all day long. And about 3 weeks after the invasion, our squadron got orders to go to Beauvais, France, which outside of Beauvais was a very large German airfield that the Allies had captured. And the planes and the plane crews flew across the channel and landed at the airport. The squadron and all the equipment and everything came across the channel, and it took them 3 weeks to get to us. In the meantime, we're living in pup tents, eating K rations. Believe me, no hot meals, eating K rations. And interestingly enough, the luncheon is cheese.
You still remember that, huh?
Yeah, after about 3 weeks, you were pretty well bound up.
Mm-hmm. So you needed some of that cascara bark.
Yeah, I could have used it then. Anyway, we, as I said, we were there in northern France, near the Belgian border, when Rundstedt made the breakthrough in the Ardennes, the Battle of the Bulge. And again, when the weather cleared, it was bluebird weather, and the Allies put every plane they could. And as my recollection is that in 2 days they wiped out what remained of the German Air Force, and they just pounded the devil out of those people. So, I'm in France.
Yes.
And I'm due for reassignment to the States.
How long was your hitch?
Well, there is no length when you're during the war.
But when you had enlisted, the war was not on.
Well, it was 4 years. A normal hitch was 4 years.
Okay, so it was just extended because
Yeah,
of
everybody was just automatically extended.
I see.
And incidentally, when I was in Oklahoma, I got romantic and got married, and to a very pretty young lady who had tuberculosis. And I mentioned that for a later follow-up. And we subsequently went overseas. And then when I got reassigned to the States, it was deemed advisable by the doctors to be stationed as nearly as possible to the Seattle area, because we had a home in West Seattle that I had bought for my mother when I was stationed up in Alaska. And my mother subsequently had a stroke and passed away. And so...
Had your parents ever formally divorced?
Yes. And so my wife was living in West Seattle in the home. And so with a little luck and et cetera, why, I got stationed at Boeing Field with an air transport command, and I spent my remaining service at Leeland Field.
Well, just incidentally, what was the therapy for tuberculosis in the 40s?
Well, in those days, the number one treatment was bed rest, and if the condition was not adequately treated by bed rest, and you might want to verify some of these facts with a tuberculosis specialist. But they had a treatment called pneumothorax, and that was artificial bed rest. And they would go in with a large hollow ground needle between the ribs and into the lung, and they'd collapse it with air pressure. And it would stay collapsed for X amount of time. And that was artificial bed rest. And if the situation progressed more adversely, then they did surgery, and they permanently collapsed the lung, and they did that by removing a couple of ribs here and a couple of ribs back there, and I don't remember what they did internally, maybe just automatically then, without that support, automatically collapsed.
This must have been very difficult for you both.
Well, that isn't interesting, because I ultimately got a divorce, and it had nothing to do with the tuberculosis. But of course, we were married for a short time, and bingo, overseas I go. And one of the tragedies of marrying, let's say, young enough that you have not had the experience to understand what the implications of something are, which can run in a wide range of various emotions and so forth. But particularly amongst people that I met, over the years that had tuberculosis, it was a attitude of live for today and to hell with tomorrow, because there may not be any tomorrow. And my wife was a very attractive, vivacious gal, and not, I'd have to say this in all honesty, not bad morally, but she liked to party and dance. And I'm all serious come back from the war, and it's not a very happy situation.
But not uncommon, I must say, among
no,
GIs.
I'm sure. And of course, you learn all these things when it's too late.
Yes. Oh, no.
But one should obviously think not twice, but 400 or 500 times about marrying somebody with a really serious chronic ailment. I don't care what it is, disabling, because the party that is ill just does not interpret things and see things the way, let's say, a normal or rational thinking person would.
And when did your divorce come?
Well, it must have come, I don't know.
Is it part of your Kirkland story, or is it before that?
Well, yes and no. Incidentally, my dad ultimately discontinued the grocery store. He owned the building, and he went into used furniture and used hardware and some new, of course.
And where was that building?
The same one.
Same place.
That's the what is now the
Creative Arts League?
Yeah, the Creative Arts building. And he had that business going when I returned from the service period and to West Seattle where I was living, and I went to work for him in the furniture store.
So obviously you had maintained a good relationship with him.
Oh yeah,
despite the
there
divorce.
wasn't that kind of a family breakup, there was, and later my dad and my two brothers and I joined to open Leeland Motors across the street in that big building.
Mm-hmm.
And my brother, for some years, I don't know just how many, my middle brother John ran it. Mm-hmm. And I might say that somewhere along the line, I don't know, probably a couple of years or something like that, I bought the furniture store for my dad.
Your dad's quite kind of a remarkable person. He had been a timber broker, a dairyman, a groceryman, and then a used furniture store owner.
And then ultimately a motor company. We had the Hudson Agency.
Was he hunting for the right thing, or was he
No,
restless?
my dad was a pretty active, pretty strong man, and he did well. He managed to buy that building across the street where the gas station is now. They tore that building down, but he had that, and that was, I guess you'd call it low-cost room for rent and apartments.
Is that where he lived? Did he live in?
No. He lived in the upstairs for years. He lived above the furniture store and the Creative Arts building. Had almost one whole side of the building for an apartment. Mm-hmm. And if you remember, that building's got kind of a cupola window,
Yes.
And that was his living room. And
was he pleased by the historic associations of those buildings? Did he care about things like that?
Well, I don't think that really come into play much.
Mm-hmm.
Prior, and of course, ultimately he sold me the business, and ultimately he sold me the building. And and then ultimately I sold the building, and this was after I had left the legislature. Mm-hmm. I mean, left the city of Kirkland, I should say, not the legislature. And
well, what did Kirkland look like when you came back in 1946? How would you describe the place?
Well, it's too bad that you don't have some early pictures, and perhaps you do. But of course, the focal point of the town really was the ferry slip, because the ferry ran every hour, and that was, you understand, that predated much by way of transportation to Seattle, unless you wanted to drive all the way around.
Right.
Everybody took the ferry, either just as a walk-on and then catch the bus on the other side, or streetcar, actually, I think as it was in those days. So that was kind of the focal point. And you had the bank on your own corner, and the Up and Up on the other, and Halverson's drugstore on the other, and Coleman drugstore on the other corner. Mm. So That was the center of town. Somebody asked me this question, I think, today. Incidentally, I had lunch today with Bill Goodloe, recently retired from the Supreme Court. And he brought his son along, and we had been with, B and I had attended the retirement ceremony for Judge Fred Dorr when he retired here somewhat recently, and I've known Bill Goodloe for umpteen years, long before I went to the legislature, because he was active in Republican politics, and I think I mentioned to you in our initial conversation that I became active in the Young Republicans, and,
Yes.
and my recollection is that Bill Goodloe was active at the state level in the senior Republican Party. And in any event, I came in contact with him back in the days that I was active in the Young Republicans. And anyway, we ran into Bill at Fred Dorr's retirement, and he happened to mention to me that he had a quarry site in Snohomish County that he'd been trying to get a permit on for years. And I said, well, if you want to get together sometime, and I might be able to offer you some suggestions on that, because I've owned one for 20 years.
Yeah, you tried.
And so this is just a relatively, a few months ago, a couple of months ago. So here, a short time ago, he called. Well, he sent me one of his newsletters, and on it he had written, "Call me." And but before I could get around to call, I'm kind of tardy at returning calls sometimes. And he called again, and to let me know that he had gotten the permit finally. And so, to make a long story short, we arranged to have lunch today. He brought his son with him, who I would judge is somewhere in his 40s. And we met up at Gabby's. I think I told you where that is on 148. That has a wonderful prime rib sandwich. And we talked for 3 hours. And they are now, they have the property, they have the rock deposit, and they have the permit. And that's where I was about 25 years ago. I had the permit. So we had quite a bit to talk about, and I hope that I was able to give him some ideas, and his son, on what to do and what not to do, and who to look out for, and so forth and so on. And
The downtown Kirkland was pretty
but downtown Kirkland,
primitive, or pretty
Well-
sophisticated, or what did it look like
well,
to
I'll
you?
tell you. Of course, where the ball field and park is, and later that I don't know what they call it now, the large building just east of where the old city hall was.
You know,
I mean, just east. Whereas now,
you don't mean the library. You don't mean
no, I'm talking about when you coming from Redmond and you come down, was it Central Way or
85th. Down 85th, west to Kirkland.
you come down the main drag into Redmond, into Kirkland, and there's Park Place on the left,
Yes.
and then between there and the town was a park.
There's a park with a ball field,
Yeah.
and then there's
There used to be a big building there that was a National Guard building or something. And
okay.
anyway, of course, none of that was there, is what I'm getting to and I'm talking about early, not when I became necessarily mayor, but I mean when I was a young boy and my dad had the dairy route and was delivering, and I'd go with him sometimes.
Well, you were mayor, became mayor in '51.
Yeah.
Right? So we're talking about 5 years before that.
Or maybe a lot more than that, you see, because I grew up in Redmond, and we'd be visits. I remember there was a penny store, but when I became mayor, at that stage, from where the old city hall was, that street on both sides, there were no sidewalks whatsoever. It was just dirt path. And and that's why I mentioned Goodlaw. We happened to, he asked me that same question, what did Kirkland look like? And I said, well, when I became mayor, about half the town didn't have any sidewalks. About half the sidewalks they had was board sidewalks. And the sidewalks they did have was all broken up and cracked and one thing and another. And it was by today's standard, it was quite primitive. It offered a wealth of opportunities to work on and make improvements.
What was the waterfront like to either side of the ferry slip, for instance?
Well, you had the ferry slip, and the water itself came up, as I think I mentioned to you previously, to within about 15 or 20 feet of the back of all those buildings that are that front on Lake Street. And that was all lake. And the city hall had been built, and the sewer treatment plant had been built. Apparently, because it was located right on the waterfront, Kirkland presented quite a sewage problem, and I presume, this was before my time, but I presume there was probably considerable federal money or one thing or another went into making it possible to put that sewer plant in. And the sidewalks, you mentioned that several times specifically. There was no sidewalks. They were board sidewalks, or they were in a terrible point of deterioration, the existing sidewalks.
How were the streets? How was the paving on the streets and
Well,
the drainage?
that was pretty bad. We didn't have any drainage at that time, really. We did, during my administration, we did a major overhaul on that street from
Lake Street, you mean?
about that ballpark up to I'm talking about Central Way.
Central Way.
Yeah, and we did a major drainage and sidewalks and this was not at the beginning of my administration. It was later on.
Now that area along Central Way that is now the park and Park Place, the area that is east of the Armory, that was farm.
There was well, more or less. It was quite rural, and there was even prior to building Park Place. You might, incidentally, somebody you might talk to if he's still living, I don't know, and that's Leo Hayward. He was in the oil business, and consequently he was, he got all over town. And another person, if he's still living, would be Mr. Crow, who used to be the sewer superintendent. I think it's C-R-O-W. And I'm on tip of my tongue. The fellow that was the park superintendent and the water superintendent, V.L. Elson was the water superintendent. He's deceased, and Clem Reynolds was the chief of police, and I think Clem is still living if you can run him down. And he could give you some real good background on the background of the Redmond Police Department.
Redmond or Kirkland?
I mean Kirkland, pardon me. And
how dependent would you say Kirkland was on the ferries?
pardon?
How dependent was Kirkland's commerce on the ferries?
Well,
where did Kirkland businessmen make their money? What was the market?
from local people, yeah, and from, of course, Kirkland, had the stores in those days. Redmond didn't have stores of any, except a grocery store and a drugstore, that sort of thing. The penny store was a big draw, even from Bellevue, you see, because that also, as a shopping center, predated Bellevue's emergency as a shopping center.
Yes.
And, I can remember when half of Bellevue was strawberry fields. I mean, literally. And, Bellevue just exploded overnight when it started to grow, and it started to grow with the, with the bridge development and so forth. I'm talking about the first bridge development.
1940.
And,
did Bellevue Square threaten Kirkland?
oh, I don't think so. I think, first of all, I think they handle two different levels of merchandise. And, of course, Kirkland has expanded greatly, and it's more sophisticated in taste and one thing and another. A lot of people, you see, Kirkland used to be the shopping center, and Penny's was the shopping store. And people come from Redmond to buy their boots and their winter clothes and outfit the kids, and you'd go to Coleman or Halverson's Drug to get your doctor prescriptions filled, or you'd get on the ferry and go to Seattle and go shopping, take the bus. Streetcars, actually, most of the time in those days.
And what was the effect of Bellevue Square on that?
Well, I don't know really that it had any. I really never, in my own mind, felt that it had an adverse impact on Kirkland. And the reason I say that, and people that were in business downtown, if you could talk to them, Alice Coleman is still living. I don't know if she's been suggested as a. I don't know if you've interviewed her, but
I haven't. Someone else has on the project.
She should, because she was a. I served on the city council with Alice, and she served on the council when I was mayor, and she would be able to answer questions like, what was the impact? Another person that might be able to shed some light, although he wasn't that old at the time, was Dick Shinstrom, because his dad and ran the bank, and the conversation at home and one thing and another over the dinner table.
Okay, so this is our second take in this interview. We're sort of in general talking about
Competitive impact of Bellevue.
The competitive impact of Bellevue, the loss of the ferries to Kirkland, the incorporation of Bellevue in '53. There's a lot happening between the end of the war and 1955.
Well, from a personal viewpoint, my political activity as mayor and subsequently in the legislature, I was very fortunate in that I served at a time when there was unlimited opportunity and you could get something done. The problem is you can't get anything done anymore, particularly on the state level, because there's so many pressure groups and people have become so politically oriented and politically minded that they're afraid to do anything for alienating this group or alienating that group. And they, it's assumed that that everybody in politics has got their hand out looking for a bribe or whatever. And that has had a very deteriorating effect on being able to accomplish anything in government. If I may digress for a moment, let me say that I've always considered one of the most effective and useful tools in the legislature was the third house, that's the lobbyists. Because they could bring great expertise on every side of an issue to educate the legislators in a short period of time. And when you're only meeting 60 days every 2 years, barring an extended session for budgetary considerations, it's a very fast-moving pace. And the need to get together to bring members of both parties together on issues, and I must say I was fortunate in that my major activity was in transportation.
Now, we're talking about the legislature?
We're talking about the legislature now.
Okay.
But I'm talking about it in a sense of getting something done. For this I blame the media. I've always felt that the media wasn't going to be happy till they could run the legislature and run the governmental officials. And they've got it now that you don't dare take somebody out to lunch and buy them lunch without reporting it to the appropriate authorities and one thing or another, and it's a contribution or it's a lobbyist fee or it's this or that or something else. And it inhibits the free interchange and discussion, and particularly on an informal basis. When I first became a member of the legislature and joined the Transportation Committee, Julia Butler Hanson was the chairman. She was the most powerful chairman in Olympia. And she said, and I never forgot it, and she and I always got along rather famously, that once you entered those doors of the committee room, you were neither Democrat or Republican. And she was a very partisan Democrat, you understand, but she didn't operate on the floor of the House, yes, but in the committee room, no. And we can get into this at a later time, but my wife in years past, and it was prior to the time that Bea and I were married, they used to have neighborhood foreign dinner parties. And if it was French, why they'd dress in the attire, and they'd have the menus and the decorations and the flag, and there was, you know, on tape or records or cassettes, whatever, there was the music and narration of the country and so forth. And so we became, Bea and I became rather famous, or I should say Bea did, with the dinner parties we would throw. And we'd throw the French dinner party or the Scottish dinner party or the whatever. And I would invite, and I'm just telling you this because you can't do it anymore, I would invite as many Democrats as I would. First of all, we'd invite all anybody that wanted to come, you know, from the committee. And then we'd invite the Senate members to come of the committee, both Democrat and Republican. And we had as many as 400 people at dinner parties. And the lobbyists would provide all the food and the booze. And we had many of them. I only made one mistake, because they were fabulous and everybody looked forward to having them. And we really got a lot of accomplished with the informal off the record opportunity to discuss issues and one thing and another, and I'm speaking primarily of transportation issues, that it was able to do under those circumstances. And I think the biggest mistake I ever made is the only person that I never invited was Governor Dan Emmons. But everybody else was. And I just thought, and it was a mistake on my part, I just thought he was too busy and it was beneath his office to bring him into that informal gathering, see. But I'm sure that I made one of the biggest political mistakes of my life by not doing it, because I think he probably resented.
Were there any consequences to that resentment?
Oh, not that I'm aware of, but I'm just saying it's something that, it's a courtesy that I should have extended that I didn't. But I did it purely out of oversight and concern that it might not be proper. But anyway, getting back to Kirkland, I'm just sick that we didn't do this a year ago. Because a year ago, Floyd Jennings was living. And Floyd Jennings was with the Bureau of Governmental Research and Services at the University of Washington. And he was an MIT graduate, and he was a planning expert. And he went to I'm sure he's been to every city in the state and helped them with their planning ordinances and this and that and the next thing. And he was very helpful. And Chester Beeson.
He was very helpful to the city of Kirkland.
Oh, yeah.
Did he do a formal study through his department, or was he helpful as an individual?
Well, I think probably both. I couldn't specifically tell you any specific piece of legislation or study, but Chester Beeson and Floyd Jennings were over to my office when I was a member many times to consult with me and advise and suggest and so forth. And they did this to every city in the state. And so they were very knowledgeable. And just Floyd died just a few months ago.
Well, no matter when we started.
But there is somebody that you might be. There, I think he's retired now, but did the name Lamb ever ring a bell?
Not just that name, no.
Well, why don't you I'm sure the Bureau is still with the University of Washington, and write down the name Lamb, because he's living up here on Union Hill now. He's retired, and I see him at the Cutlery Restaurant in Redmond from time to time.
Interesting.
And he worked very closely with this same situation, you see, all over the state. And he might very well be able to give you a great deal of help.
Thank you. In terms of difficulty in getting things done, when you were becoming involved with the Young Republicans in the state, that was about the time that Houghton incorporated as a community, as a town in 1947, in order to escape Kirkland and removed in a way from Kirkland the opportunity to administer an industrial district along the waterfront. How much of a problem was that for Kirkland?
Well, I think that Houghton hated Kirkland's guts. And certain people in Houghton. And I think they particularly hated mine. But you see, I came along in the early 50s, and so I wasn't privy, or I wasn't part of that initial bitterness when they went their own separate ways. But you see, we probably, they probably felt that they got terrible treatment from Kirkland. The truth of the matter is they got marvelous treatment from Kirkland.
Well, lay it all out.
Well, first of all, Kirkland owned the water system and provided the water for everybody to drink of water in Houghton. To what extent, and I'd have to look at records now, to what extent sewers existed in Houghton, they were owned and operated. I mean, they were operated and treated by the Kirkland facilities. Literally, the things that made Houghton livable was owned and administered by Kirkland.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why ultimately it got together. But there was, you know, the old saying, I'd rather be a frog in a little pond than a pollywog in a big one. You ever heard that expression or not?
Oh, yes.
And I think that typified the Houghton-Kirkland feud, so-called feud. We had people in Houghton who were proud of their position. We had the mayor and I forget who the mayor was before Ewing.
Berto? Berto?
Well,
Mayor
that might be the
Berto?
one. I think that's the one I'm thinking of. I remember they had they had a meeting one time, to which I wasn't invited, but I went, to discuss the pros and cons of joining with Kirkland. And I felt since that was, I could certainly speak for Kirkland, I wasn't out of place to go there. And the meeting proceeded along, and there were questions from the audience from the meeting. And finally a fellow stood up and said to the mayor of Houghton that, he said, I'd like to ask Mayor Leeland a question. And the mayor of Houghton said, you can ask him the question, but he can't answer it. Now you get the idea of the atmosphere. And, but Kirkland never went out of its way to penalize or hurt, and it was tempting at times, you understand, just cut their damn water off, you know, because they were like the spoiled child in a lot of ways, complaining about the treatment they got from Kirkland, and they got the same water rate that the Kirkland residents paid that owned the system. I must admit, I discussed at times having a surcharge for Houghton because they didn't own the system, and there was no reason why they should have water at the same rate that the so-called feud. Now, I'm not talking about what underlying sentiments and hostility might exist amongst the general residents of Houghton. But as far as what was apparent on the surface and to the public in large and one thing and another, there was a very few people ever involved in the so-called Houghton-Kirkland feud, in my opinion. I'm not saying others would agree, but in my opinion. And
well, you became mayor in 1951. When did you become aware of the political scene in Kirkland?
In what respect?
Well, when you say there's no underlying reasons for the Kirkland-Houghton feud, maybe they predate.
Well, that's what I'm saying. If in fact, in other words, maybe the bitterness all started when they so-called broke away and formed their own city, and so there.
I think you inherited some things.
Yeah, there might have been some ongoing hostility, but nothing that was done ever in my administration that I know of was ever done to offend Houghton, or I may have said some things from time to time that some people in Houghton didn't like.
Well, how did you get into the mayor's chair? We've jumped ahead a number of times. Let's go back and get you into politics.
Well, I had purchased the furniture store for my dad, and I'm running a furniture business. And I have always been interested in politics, I guess you'd say, in foreign affairs, foreign events. And I may have mentioned to you one time that when I was young, and let's say high school age, and even pre-high school age, but certainly high school age, and then subsequent to that, in my young adult life, I would read the editorial pages in the newspaper before I'd read the funnies. And that has continued all my life. I probably read the funnies first now, and the sports page second, but I read, and we have in our home every month, an amazing list of publications. I have Forbes, I have U.S. News, I have Reader's Digest, I have Money, oh Lord, I have Discovery, National Geographic, Kiplinger's Letter, I could just go on and on and on. And that's my reading nowadays, and has been for some time. I rarely pick up and read a book anymore. I have an amazing difficulty in getting through what's in my home every day. And so, but that interest in what was going on in the community and in the nation and abroad has been very close to me, and from my very youngest years. And I was always semi-interested in politics, not necessarily public office, but politics. And somewhere along the line, in addition to running the furniture store, I joined the Young Republican organization. And I think the first one I joined was a group that was out of Seattle. And I don't recall just exactly how I got connected with it, but some of the early members were Dan Evans and Jimmy Anderson and the Pritchards. I could go on and on and on. And anyway, I know what we did. We had a Young Republican club on the east side. And
who were some of the members on the east side?
Well, and I can't tell you his name now. He later became a water commissioner in Bellevue. And this was about years ago. He and I were quite good friends, and in any event, I started going to the conventions, the state conventions, and some of the, the county conventions, and participated in the behind-the-scenes maneuvering and smoke-filled rooms and one thing or another of this candidate or that candidate for this office or that office and so forth, and there came a time, I think my immediate predecessor was Frank Pritchard, whose brother is the Pritchard that went to Congress. And they had a printing business in Seattle. And I don't know whether I encouraged myself or others encouraged me, just to be perfectly honest with you. But anyway, I became a candidate for the state presidency.
Of the Young Republicans.
Of the Young Republicans. And I'll never forget, Frank Pritchard presiding as president when his brother, and this, he was not aware of this, his brother comes up, Joe Pritchard, to nominate me for the state presidency. And anyway, to make a long story short, we ran and we won. And we were granted a expense funds from the state Republican Central Committee. And as a president, I sat on the state Central Committee.
And this is before 1950?
Yes, this is, well, or it might have been after I first became mayor, you understand.
Oh, okay,
really? But anyway, to get to the portion that you want to know, how did I get active in Kirkland? I remember coming back from my first convention. I think it was my first convention. And when you're active in a partisan political party, you learn certain campaign techniques and do's and don'ts and just a normal, like brushing your teeth and putting your shoes on, why certain things if you're going to run a campaign you do.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think Kirkland had ever seen a campaign like that before.
Well, what induced you to run for office at all? Why bother?
Well, I was interested in what was going on, and of course, there was an awful lot of things in Kirkland that needed doing.
That needed doing?
That needed doing. I mean, and the the police department was a prime point of controversy at the time, and
Why? What about it was controversial?
the chief, the old chief, and
What-
nothing personally, understand. No, most of us that were griping didn't even know him, you know, really on a personal level.
Mm-hmm. And what was his practice? That was
Well, he was just an older person that I guess was very set in his ways, and it was a fairly small department, and a lot of the merchants didn't like the way the police department was being run, and that and a whole wide range of issues. I was interested in the community, what was going on, and I decided I'd run for mayor.
Now, were you representing the businessmen of the community?
No, I don't think at the time, I wouldn't say I was representing the businessman, because those that you would characterize as the Rotary and the Kiwanis Club in those days was the old guard.
Mm.
But there were people of my age. Bob Gardner, unfortunately, has passed away. It's too bad. He's been a marvelous person for the interview.
Now, what did he do, Bob Gardner?
Well, he was in real estate, but primarily in insurance, right next to Coleman Drug Store.
Okay. And
So
who
he-
else was one of the young Turks here?
There was Chick Underwood, that Underwood Arcade, and
Okay.
Chick and Nadine. There was Carl Snyder, the veterinarian.
Hmm.
I'd almost have to look at a list of who was, you know. Anyway,
Did they tend to be all Republicans? Was this
no,
partisan?
no.
So this is bipartisan.
Yeah, this was, I would say it was bipartisan. I don't think the Republican, and I didn't mean to imply that I ran as a Republican. I learned some techniques by going to the Republican conventions and one thing and another.
Okay.
Campaign techniques. Anyway, I decided to run. I came back. I filed for office. And Chick Underwood and Bob Gardner and I think Carl Snyder also filed for the council. And we kind of wound up, because we were the outs, we kind of wound up running as a team.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I told you that it's common practice now, but it had never been done before in Kirkland. I rented the front corner of the front page of both newspapers, and my picture and my little message was there every week.
It's the East Side Journal and the News Advertiser.
Right.
Okay.
And I did some direct mailings and things of that nature, and the old guard just thought it was, the candidacies of all of us was absolutely ridiculous.
Mm.
And we actually won in a landslide. Just,
Do you remember now who you ran against?
well, I'm trying to remember whether it was Everett that I ran against or not. It must have been.
Really?
No, it wouldn't. No, I ran for the city council first,
Mm-hmm.
and Mayor Everett was mayor. And us Turks all got elected, and we had the majority of the council. And I think I told you that Harry Everett said, and Harry Everett and I got along. There may be time to time that you ask questions and I give you an answer that might appear derogatory about the former mayor. It's not intention. Harry Everett and I got along fine.
It's fine to disagree.
But you
Nothing wrong with
understand,
that.
you understand there was the age gap, there was the ins and there was the outs, and there was the things that had to be done, and anyway, I think I told you that the mayor announced at our first formation after we were sworn into office that he was going to appoint a police commission, and the chairman of that committee was going to be Chick Underwood. And Chick Underwood hit the table and said, "And the first goddamn thing we're going to do is fire the chief." I thought Harry Everett was going to have a heart attack right there. And and I don't remember even what committee I was appointed to. I had some major committee. I don't even remember what it was. It might have been streets, but I don't know. And we operated as any small town council would, and the mayor and one thing and another, and we got through the police dispute.
Was the chief fired and replaced?
Seems to me it was. I think that's when Clem Reynolds came in.
Weren't lack of revenues just a real problem in trying to make any major changes?
Oh yeah,
in
well, this is
Kirkland?
true of all cities. This was true of all cities, and this is not quite as true now. Well, it is in many instances, but I do remember that the assessed valuation of the downtown business area exceeded the entire rest of the valuation of all the homes in Kirkland, revenue-wise. And now I'm not saying that's the gospel, but that's my recollection of the time. I was amazed at the.
How do you read that? Does that mean that the dwellings were shabby, or what does that mean to you?
Well, it just means that it takes an awful lot of houses to make up for in any community, the industrial, the commercial, the manufacturing base. There's millions of dollars involved in maybe just one building, in a commercial or industrial zone.
There was no industry, was there, in downtown
No,
Kirkland?
no,
We're talking
no.
about retail.
No, we're talking mostly retail, shops and so forth, and buildings.
That's amazing.
And then, as you remember, about a year into our terms, Mayor Everett died of a heart attack. And it became the responsibility of the council to elect one of the council members, not somebody from outside, although I don't even know whether the law would have permitted them to do that, but my recollection was they had to choose a member of the council to be mayor. And a consensus just kind of developed that should be me. And I don't, to be honest with you, I don't remember campaigning for the job a bit. Maybe I got it because nobody else would take it. That's possible. I'm serious.
Very difficult task at that time.
And also, I probably was more, I'm going to use the word political, but I don't mean in a partisan sense, politically oriented than any of the rest of them at the time, regardless of any age differences or so forth.
How would that have helped you in the mayor's chair?
Well, I think probably at least certainly over the years, connections with other people that could give good advice and one thing another. And you mentioned Dick Everest. Dick Everest was probably the political godfather of Kirkland.
Mm.
And I don't mean that in any sinister way. I mean, he was the man. And and I availed myself of his counsel, and he freely gave it.
Mm.
Probably a lot more so than people ever realized. I don't know that he started out on my side, but I'm certainly satisfied he wound up on my side.
How about the newspapers? Were they helpful? What was their role in the community?
Well, of course,
Very well. This is my second interview with Mr. Leeland. This is December 15th, 1993. This is Lorraine McConaughey. This tape is the property of the Kirkland Local History Project, City of Kirkland. Well, let's continue to talk about some of your accomplishments in the City of Kirkland during the 1950s in particular. You were telling me a little bit about bringing water to the city. Was water a real problem in Kirkland?
well, it was a problem because the Kirkland water supply came from a series of springs and relatively shallow wells in the so-called watershed, which was down on the south border of Houghton. It was owned by the city of Kirkland, but it was actually in Houghton.
Which was at that time
A separate entity.
Separate town.
Although, as I think we've discussed previously, the water system throughout Houghton was owned by the city of Kirkland, and it was furnished and supplied and maintained by the city of Kirkland. We were at a period where we needed additional water, and I remember that H.O. Myers, who was a well driller and had been drilling wells for many years in the area, came up to see me, and he wanted to make sure he wasn't imposing himself on me, but he wanted to give me some advice and some suggestions, and he suggested that if we were going to enter into a drilling program in the Kirkland area, that we ought to bring in some really qualified experts to determine locations for drilling, because the substructure of the land was such that you could spend a lot of money and you could drill a lot of holes that didn't produce anything.
He had kind of a neat nickname.
Yeah, H2O was his nickname, and everybody that'd been around long knew that was Myers, the well driller from Houghton. We did that. We employed the city of Kirkland employed the firm of Robertson and Roberts from Tacoma, and they made an extensive survey, and they came up with 3 sites, and we wound up drilling one additional well in the watershed area. We drilled 2 other wells along 116th, and we got pretty good producing wells in all locations, and that carried the city through until such time as, this was after my time, of course, but such time as the Metro Water was made available to the east side.
Mm-hmm. And you, in summary, you had mentioned repairs to the city sidewalks downtown.
Well, when I first became mayor, the downtown city sidewalks were in a pretty sad condition.
How, be literal, how bad were they?
Well, in some places they didn't exist at all. Others, where there was sidewalks, either concrete or asphalt, they were badly cracked and uneven, and the city really was subject to a lot of lawsuits if somebody had fallen and broken a leg or hurt themselves.
Where there were no sidewalks, was it just dirt?
Dirt, right, just dirt.
So it would get muddy and...
Right, right. And we entered onto a self-help program that I got the council to adopt. The property owners would put up the money for the materials, and the city street department crew would put in the sidewalks or make the repairs, whichever the case was. And we accomplished this program pretty much all that we needed and wanted to accomplish at the time on that basis. We had some flack that we weren't operating illegally, and that the only way you could take money from somebody, a property owner, for example, was to have an LID. Mm-hmm. And I would explain to those people that this was a cooperative self-help program, and that with the city doing the work, and all that the property owner was doing was putting up the money for the materials, that it was a tremendous saving to them over what the formation of an LID would be, and we were able to do it immediately. And
was your Public Works Director Nobby Clark? Who was your Public Works fellow?
Well, that was before the day we had such a thing as those terminologies. We had a street superintendent.
Okay.
And his name was Ray Foster.
Oh, okay.
And we had a water superintendent and a sewer superintendent and a park superintendent and a chief of police, but that was about it. I think I told you in one of our informal chats about the Up and Up Cafe in downtown Kirkland. And property owners in that particular area had an attorney come over to talk to me about the legal procedures that needed to be followed if you were going to do this kind of a program, and where the property owners had to join in. And again, I explained that it was a cooperative program by the city doing the work, and the other people just putting up, the property owner just putting up money for the materials. And but they kept insisting that this was not a legal method. And one particular property was involved was the Up and Up Cafe. Well, Lowell King, who was a newspaper editor in the town with the News Advertiser, his offices were located in that building. And on a previous occasion, he had told me that if you went up in the attic of the Up and Up Cafe, there was about an inch or inch and a half of grease attached to all the tuberfors and to all the structural improvements up there. And being young and impetuous, and sometimes having a short fuse, after I'd explained about 3 times about it being a cooperative improvement program, and still being told that it was illegal and I couldn't do it, I said, well, there's another way we can do it. I said, I can send the fire marshal over there tomorrow and condemn your goddamn building. And that was the last I heard of that opposition, and the sidewalks were being repaired the next morning.
Was Lowell King an acquaintance, a friend of yours? Or was
well, he was a long-time resident of Kirkland, and he had a lot of friends and a lot of acquaintances all over town, and he owned a newspaper that he printed, which was the secondary newspaper. The Journal Eastside Journal was the principal newspaper.
What was your relationship like with the press?
Well, I'm happy to say that in my municipal government days, it was quite good. But when I got involved later on with, you might say, the East Side versus the city of Seattle, the relationship was not very happy. They tagged me with such terms as Concrete Curtain Leeland and Asphalt Al and things of that nature. They were not very kind to me.
And what press was that?
Well, that was both the Times and the Seattle PI.
Okay. so that's the Seattle Press. Would you say that newspaper coverage and newspaper support helped you in making the changes that you wanted to see happen in Kirkland, or was it sort of a neutral party?
Well, my recollection is that the city council and I worked quite closely together, and so it was kind of a united front as far as the city government was concerned. And my recollection is that we got a great deal of cooperation out of the press, both newspapers and the Chamber of Commerce and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. Was the council willing to take risky decisions? You're describing this downtown improvement district, this cooperative organization. How was this a unilateral decision that you yourself made on your own, or did the council?
This many years later, I couldn't tell you exactly word for word, but my recollection was that I presented it to the city council what I was going to do, and whether it was voted on or not. I think it was voted on because it was using city crews to do the work. We didn't have any problems with the city council or the mayor's office in that respect.
Would you say that the city council during your administration and also the staff was amateurish?
Amateurish?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I wouldn't say that, and the reason I wouldn't say that is that we started out with a city clerk, and you'll have to check the records because my memory has faded some, but he was a long-time city clerk. And then the city treasurer was a long-time city treasurer. And it was some time before one or the other were replaced. In fact, I don't recall that the city treasurer was replaced during my time in office. So what I'm saying is that we were rather, on the whole, younger, perhaps more aggressive council than they'd had for years. Mm. But we worked very well together, and with one or two more or less minor exceptions, we didn't have much dissension.
What about city staff? What about the chief of police?
Well, the chief of police, when we first went on the city council, and I say we because several of the members of the city council and I served on the city council prior to the time that I became mayor. And there was an older gentleman that was the chief of police, and he had been quite controversial.
And what was his name?
I have to check the record.
Okay.
Then
do you remember the nature of the controversy?
Well, the controversy was that the council members, by and large, felt that the chief had served his purpose, and we needed new blood to run the department. And
because he was quite elderly, or?
Well, I would say he was quite elderly, and there was people felt that he was too elderly to meet the demands of the office. And there had been, if you could get your hands on and check the newspaper accounts for a 2 or 3 year period prior to this time, you'd have found that the police department was the most contentious department in the city. And
it must have been an embarrassment, frankly. I mean, it was pretty
Well, of course, things didn't get reported and blown up to the point that they are today with the television and so forth. And so I'd say outside of the downtown business people and a few of the citizens and the city government, why, I'd say it was pretty much within those confines.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So he was unwilling to retire, or he was not yet a retired?
Well, you see, the chief of police was the mayor's appointment, not the city council's. And this had led to a lot of disagreement. I remember when I first went on the city council, along with Chick Underwood and Bob Gardner. And I'm trying to think of the veterinarian's name that was on the city council. I remember Mayor Everett at the first meeting, organizational meeting, announcing that he was going to, for the first time, he was going to appoint a police commission. And Chick Underwood was going to be the chairman of it. And Chick Underwood hit the table with his fist and he said, the first goddamn thing we're going to do is fire the chief. And I only say that to illustrate that there was dissension but it resolved itself without any bloodshed, and we ultimately had a new chief.
How did it resolve itself? Was he let go?
Well, that's too many years ago to tell you now.
Okay, because as you say, one gets just the faintest taste in the newspapers of what's going on behind the scenes.
Well, I remember there's some job owning going on back and forth between the council and the mayor. I'm talking about the new council, but my recollection now is that it wasn't, a terribly long time after these meetings I speak of that Mayor Everett passed away with a heart attack. And the members of the city council elected me to be the mayor. And a lot of these things just kind of resolved themselves. In other words,
so did you
I think the gentleman retired, is my recollection.
Before you became mayor?
Could have been, or it could have been shortly after, but he retired.
How about the fire chief?
Well, ours was a volunteer fire department. And this is before the days of paid fire departments. And we had a very popular fire chief and an assistant fire chief, and they were, to the best of my knowledge, they were chief and assistant chief for all the time I was in office and some time afterwards. Leonard Paulson was the chief, and I can't think of the first name, but Bird was the assistant chief. They're very, very popular and hardworking, and as I say, they were. It was a volunteer fire department.
You had a couple of other items on your list of innovations and changes that during the
Well, I mentioned that
you brought to Kirkland, some of which we talked about last time, and some of which we had not talked about.
Well, I mentioned, I may have mentioned that one of the things that we undertook during my administration was to institute citywide mandatory garbage collection. That was quite controversial for quite a little while because people felt they could be able to handle their garbage the way they wanted to. But unfortunately, a lot of garbage got stacked up, piles of it along the alleys and one thing and another, and it was quite of a problem. And once it went into effect, I don't believe that the controversy lasted very long. Mm-hmm. That's my recollection. I'd say, there was a few people would gripe from time to time, but I mean, I think by and large, the vast majority of the people approved the idea of a cleaner city and mandatory garbage collection.
And the dump for all of the city of Kirkland was in Houghton?
In Houghton or wherever it was at the time that they halted, I suppose, depending on what it was. I mentioned, this may be jumping a bit, but I mentioned that during my administration we secured a project
Yes, I'm
for a city park.
A project is one of the housing projects
One of the
erected
three.
during World War II.
There was A, B, and Stewart Heights was the three projects.
So that was administered by the King County Housing
Housing
Authority.
Authority.
What happened? How did you get control of that? And what happened to the buildings?
Well, the federal government had a great deal to say about it. And the federal government apparently had built them. And the King County Housing Authority opposed the city's attempt to acquire A, and it was about that time I had occasion to make a trip back to Washington, D.C. And while I was there, with the help of the Congressman Tor Tollefson and the Congressman from Everett, they secured appointments with me with the head of the FHA and the Housing Authority, Mr. Slusser. Albert Cole was the head of the FHA, and Mr. Slusser was the head of the Housing Authority, and Mr. Slusser had been, I think, the mayor of Cleveland, and when I explained how the property of A project laid, with it was all view property overlooking the lake, and that it would have its disposition would have a tremendous impact on the future of Kirkland. He advised me that he would work, and Albert Cole also, that they would work to see that Kirkland got A project. In fact, I was told that if our state laws permitted it, we could have up to 10 years to pay for it. Mm-hmm. But unfortunately, at that time, we didn't have any such legislation that permitted a city of the third class to buy anything on contract. The same applied to park districts, school districts, so forth.
Do you know when that legislation changed?
Well, it changed after I got in the legislature, because I got it. I think it took 2 sessions to get it passed, but I know the school district used that to buy future sites, and I'm sure it helped them a great deal in planning the expansion of the Lake Washington School District. But we did get that, and it's now a park. It's called it's the Dick Everest Park, and also negotiated the purchase of the downtown waterfront from Guy Farrar when I was mayor. And the downtown waterfront at that time was just that, water. It was underwater. And it was the property that including the shoreline, that ran from the old ferry slip around to the foot of Market Street. Yes. And the waterfront at that time came to within just a few feet of the back of the old penny store. Mm-hmm. So it really was all underwater. And there again, because of the restrictions on obligation or lack of authority to obligate future city councils, we had to enter into a contract with Guy Farrar that the city would buy it on a contract, and if for any reason the city defaulted, that Guy Farrar would have to accept whatever monies he'd received from the city as liquidated damages and forego any right to sue the city for performance. Oh my goodness. And he went for that, and he's quite a civic-minded person. Mm-hmm. And although he did tell me one time later that I put one over on him. But
what was how did the town look from the water at that time? I mean, today, Kirkland presents a tidy and really rather attractive image.
Well, I don't think there was that much difference at that time. I mean, there are more buildings, there have been buildings that have been upgraded and that sort of thing. But and of course the ferry slip in effect is gone, and you've got that as integrated into the park. But had a pretty vivid picture of the waterfront in their mind because they used the ferry that ran from Kirkland over to Madison Park many times. I can't tell you how many hundreds of times I rode it in my lifetime prior to becoming the mayor of Kirkland.
Well, were there trees and grass where Marina Park is now?
No. As a matter of fact, at the foot of Market Street, there had been a lumber company, and there was the remains of docks. There was
a lumber company.
That could have been it, and there was the remains of docks, and that was one of the major chores that the city faced when we acquired the waterfront is getting rid of the old pilings and that sort of thing. A short time, relatively short time after the city acquired that property on the waterfront from Guy Farrar, we improvement project on State Street, and there was a considerable amount of fill available as a result of that project, and that fill went in to fill the waterfront to its pretty much to its present configuration. So we killed two birds with one stone. We filled the waterfront, and I might also say that and I'm asked this question many times by various people, why don't I do this, or why don't I do something else, or why don't I get back in politics, and so on. And I explained that I was fortunate enough, and those who, like me, served in the time periods that we served in, was a time when you could get something done. And, for example, can you imagine today trying to get the shoreline permits and the permission to fill that waterfront and make that park? It would just be virtually impossible.
It would be.
Although it's a tremendous benefit for everybody. You can imagine the purist in the environmental community would have raised heaven and earth to prevent it. The same thing goes with many, street projects and things of that nature. So I consider myself fortunate that, and I often tell people that you could sit down and get things done when I was in the legislature, for example. Amazing things that today I don't know how you'd even get started.
Well, if you had to choose one thing, what one thing are you proudest of during your tenure as mayor in Kirkland?
Well, if you want to talk about flash and splash, it would have to be the waterfront, because that was a major coup for the community to get that for public use. But there's a lot of things that I'll cite an administrative type of thing. And of course, subsequently the city of Kirkland went into the city manager form of government. And so you have a trained city manager, and he has the authority, and he has and presumably the authority passes on down through the ranks of the department heads and so forth. When I became mayor, the only person that could hire or fire anybody was the mayor. Okay. And we had instances of some members of the street department crew telling the superintendent, in fact, to go to hell. Because you can't fire me, only the mayor can fire me. And I heard this from many sources in the months after I became mayor. And so I called them all together one day, and I said, from this day forward, every department head will do his own hiring and his own firing, period. And at first they didn't believe me, because it had been so many years, it had been the political province of the mayor to do the hiring and firing. And of course that led to the political spoil system.
Yes.
Although you understand that the city was never in a partisan mode.
No.
Because it's nonpartisan. And that's the way things have been done for years. So I'm not faulting the former mayors at all.
But you're as proud of that administrative
Well, I think
change
so,
as you
because
are of the
because
flash.
as I said, it took a little while for the department heads to believe that I meant it. But you should have seen some of the fur fly after they found out. And the productivity and the efficiency of the departments increased considerably.
Because they could clean their own houses.
That's right,
So they're
that's
in
right.
charge of them.
Another thing we did, that in a park sense, we opened the street ends that abut Lake Washington. And to this day, there are many parks at street ends. With the street end, there's 60-foot street ends.
Yes.
And another thing I did, and I was one of the first to do this because the Association of Washington Cities people used to come around to me or send other city people from other cities around to talk to me. But we decided to levy charges against the water and sewer departments for funds for the general fund. And the reason for that is, for example, the street department or the water department would go out and tear up a street and put a water main in or fix a water main or one thing or another. And it was always the street department had to go back and finish it off. And there was never any charge made for that. That's just one example. And and I think probably you could attribute this, and I'm talking probably of maybe most of the cities in the state at the time. They didn't have the accounting and the accountability.
This is a continuation of an interview with Mr. Al Leeland on December 15th, 1993. You're giving me the impression in the way you're telling me the story that this was not a traditional method of moving money
it just had not
around.
been done. It had not been done. I'm not saying that maybe the city of Seattle or Tacoma or some of the larger cities that were more established in a professional business accounting system type of approach didn't make these charges. But I'm saying that in the city of Kirkland, and I know from the people that either came to me or the questions that the representative of the Association of Washington Cities conducted with me, that this was rather new and unheard of. But, and I might also say, it's something that could be abused, but it was not the intent to abuse it in doing so.
Was it controversial?
No, not really. Maybe I was used to controversy, I don't know, but I don't recall there was anything. And outlandish as far as within the community, the water and sewer department always had literally huge surpluses, and the money sat there. And you understand, general government took care of all the accounting and the billing and the collection. One thing, in other words, the charges that were made against the water and sewer funds were well justified.
How was the vitality and health of the retail core of Kirkland in your watch?
Well, I think you consider the years and the economy and so forth.
that it was healthy because it was what it was. It had been there for years. I think as Bellevue started to unfold, that hurt certain types of local business. I think probably hurt the penny store, for example, but new department stores in Bellevue. But you know, a gas station in Kirkland isn't too much different from a gas station in Bellevue. The same thing with a hardware store. If you have a reasonably good hardware store in the town of Kirkland, it's going to do well against, at that time, the normal hardware store in Bellevue. So I think that with the exception of the department store type of shopping, I don't think we suffered from Bellevue competition too much.
How about, we've touched on this in our last conversation, but sort of comes up again in this connection. The end of the ferry. Did the end of the ferry run hurt Kirkland business downtown, do you think?
Well, it probably did. However, the inevitability of it, you see, it was privately owned. The ferry on Lake Washington was privately owned and run by a private family for years and years and years. And they were having financial troubles for a considerable period of time. And the appeals by the ferry owners for help and one thing and another was something that was reported in the press, and I think the whole community realized that the ferry system was touch or go, and could go at any time, and there wasn't much they could do about it. And I don't remember, it very possibly could have come from the owners of the ferry system, but the proposal was submitted that the city of Kirkland operate the ferry. And the city of Kirkland took that on, and we did, and we operated something over a year, as I recall. And we were doing all right. We had the ferry offices in the city hall. We had room there, and the amount of employees was handled, and I think it probably was, you'd have to check the records to be sure, but I'm not aware that we ran any deficits or did any amount of subsidization at all. But what ended the ferry wasn't success or failure, it was the state auditor. And the state auditor came through to audit Kirkland this one bright day and advised us that the city of the third class did not have the authority to operate a ferry system. And that could only come through legislation by the state legislature. And that became the end of the ferry.
It would seem that's a very interesting story, and it would seem that with the opening of the Mercer Island Bridge, with the subsequent opening of Bell Square, and the subsequent construction of large residential housing subdivisions in Bellevue, and the end of the ferry traffic through Kirkland, that it must have been relatively hard times. Did you still have the furniture business?
Well, I did, but it was. I think I think there were other parts of the East Side growing, starting to grow, and outside shoppers coming in. That's a question that would be interesting if you put it to some of the merchants that have been here longer. I must say I neglected my business to a considerable extent in running the city.
You did?
And,
that's interesting. How did you make your living?
Well, I didn't make a whole awfully good one. But that was something that service in those days, and I'm speaking
whether it was the mayor or the council or whether it was the state legislature, for example. For many years after I went to the state legislature, my income from the legislature was $100 a month.
Mm-hmm.
And during the actual session, you got a per diem, but that was really just to cover day-to-day, housing and food and that sort of thing. So what I'm saying is that there's an era, I don't know when it would have ended, but an era that perhaps through 1970 at least, most people that served in any level of government did so at a considerable personal expense.
Mm-hmm. But the furniture store, which you owned and managed at this point, right?
Well, it was just a couple of man businesses all. It was a new and used, but mostly used. And
how long did you hold that?
I had that for 18 years altogether.
And you began, when did you get
at the end of the war, right after the end of the war.
Okay. So through the entire period you were mayor, this business was your stake?
Well, as you may or may not be aware, I served the 2 or 2.5 or 3 years, whatever it was, the remainder of Mayor Everett's term.
Mm-hmm.
And then I proposed to the council that not intending to run, that the city pay the mayor, because of the work and the responsibility and the time away from whatever business they were in or job, that they pay the mayor $500 a month. That was almost unheard of. As a matter of fact, it was enacted, and we're talking about cities now, and the mayor, council, form of government, but the Kirkland had the third highest pay of any city in the state of Washington, at $500 a month. Then I really didn't have any intention of running for mayor again. And time went on and time went on, and nobody filed, and nobody filed, and nobody filed, and we're getting up there literally the last days. And so I reluctantly filed, and then nobody filed against me.
Mm-hmm.
So they said that was a coup I accomplished. I was the only one that ever raised his salary and then ran unopposed for it.
No, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to imply that I don't know that. I do know that story. I was just trying to understand your role in the business community.
Well, I was, of course, the mayor, whoever he was, had an integral role in the business. I belong to the Chamber of Commerce. I belong to the Kiwanis Club. You've heard the old saw that the Kiwanis Club owns the town. No, the Kiwanis Club runs the town, the Rotary Club owns it, and the Lions have all the fun. That's pretty much, at least in Kirkland, it was the Kiwanis that was the predominant club, although I'd say the ownership bit attributed to the Rotary is pretty accurate. There was,
were the Kiwanians and the Rotarians real active in the 50s?
Oh, well,
here?
I think that they both were, but particularly the Kiwanis Club was very, very active. And the Chamber of Commerce was, I think, active for those days, and these were before the days of a paid manager, for the Chamber and so forth.
Yes.
Everything was pretty much volunteer. And
The things that you're proudest of in your administration, have we covered them?
I think we pretty well covered them. I might say as a follow-up, because I left office to go to the state legislature, and as a result of what I encountered there, and I'll cite one story. Naturally, when you get in the legislature, you take a lot of heat from various communities who have rather dire needs, and the city of Redmond had a dire need for the four-laning and improvement of the Kirkland-Redmond Road, particularly as it goes from 132nd to the top of the hill down into Redmond.
Now, was this when you were a freshman legislator?
Yes. And it was a rather narrow two-lane road, and it had a lot of terrible accidents, and they had a lot of fatalities. And I cite this kind of background to explain why the newspaper, the Smash Valley News newspaper, put the heat on me that they put on. They weren't trying to be personal, but I was the only one they had to pick on. And so every time there was a new accident or a new fatality, why, I heard about it, probably by way of a front page editorial. So it was at that time, and this was the seeds of the Urban Arterial Program. I got the Highway District 1 budget people aside, and I asked for a realistic prediction under the existing revenue sources and under the existing project selection system and under the allocation of fund systems. When could we look for an improvement on the Redmond to Kirkland Road? And it was nearly 20 years. Well, you understand, the east side is in ferment by this time. You know, the growth has really started, and all over the east side, and I can tell you there was no money. As you know, the funds from the gas tax is constitutionally segregated to spend on highway purposes, and the gas tax, that was what it would produce, and that's what the problem was. And this led me to initiate a program in Olympia, legislation, to create what was to become the Urban Arterial Program. And this was to provide that we would take the urban areas, and these were areas that were ultimately defined to have X amount of population in a contiguous...
So you really mean a metropolitan area?
Right.
You know, when we think
and
of urban
to build it on a
arterial,
systems basis, because it
suburban
doesn't do any good to build a road from one point A unless point B takes it the next step. And incidentally, if you read that, that's exactly what that whole article is on, is the Urban Arterial Program.
I'll be photocopying that for the file.
But we, I talked to everybody in the legislature, and in those days, the Good Roads Association and the Automobile Club felt it was their exclusive right to sponsor any increase in gas taxes. An individual legislator wasn't supposed to do it. And they actually opposed me in the committee. But we passed it in the House, which shocked everybody. We passed it in the House, but we lost it by a vote or two in the Senate. And then in the ensuing 2 years, we expanded our committees and one thing and another, and we passed it. And the gut or the backbone of the urban arterial program was initial bond issue of well, let's say the span of time that we're talking about was a bond issue for $400 million to be paid by the gas tax fund by the levy, and I think it was $0.015 additional gas tax. And I don't know how many hundreds of millions ultimately were spent on the urban arterial program, and they still have the urban arterial board, so they're probably still allocating funds to this day under that program.
Now, was it your experience in the small east side town and the area surrounding it that gave you the sense that this was a necessary program? These small cities could not afford this kind of work on their own?
I'd say my experience in Kirkland city government and in the highway committee and in discussion with the highway experts from every level, there was an X amount of money, and there was, you all have to understand that I became the first chairman of the transportation committee from King County in probably 30 years. The legislators from King County didn't get on transportation. They got on education and things that they thought would affect them in their district. And so consequently, I went on the transportation committee from the first day that I went into the legislature, and I wound up serving as chairman of it for 5 years. And it was during that period that I got most of what I got done. But the Eastern Washington, because they were interested in roads, they always, both the House and the Senate, they always dominated the Transportation Committee and the bills and the programs that were sponsored out of the legislature, which were pretty much the domain of Eastern Washington legislators, because Western Washington legislators either didn't give a damn or didn't know any better, or thought their interests lay elsewhere, and they didn't serve on. And the Transportation Committee was a huge committee, but I think at one time I was within 2 votes of having 1/2 the entire House on the committee. Later on, you know, people got to a point where they wanted on that committee.
This was kind of a big spending position for a Republican to take. Were you a new kind of urban Republican who saw problems?
I didn't look at it this way, and I don't recall too much heat, you know, from Republicans or conservatives and so forth. I remember getting the Joint Committee on Highways. That's what it was called, because it was before it was called the Department of Transportation, or the Highway or Transportation Committee. I was on the Joint Committee, and this is operates during the interim, as you probably know. And I got them to hold a meeting here on the east side. And I know that we toured Kirkland, Redmond, and Bellevue areas. And you have to understand that a great number of the people on that committee were Eastern Washington people. And I remember Sam Guest from Spokane was a senator. And I took him up and showed him the site that they were starting to develop for what is now the high school at Redmond. And nobody could believe it. They just could not conceive, because we were blocks and blocks and blocks from town. We're out there in the woods.
And it opened the eyes.
What was it that they saw there? What is it that, that you said they're shocked? Why are they shocked? And what
Because
did they see?
the advanced planning that you're going to build a high school way out here, when there isn't anybody out here now, but you have to build it because by the time you get it built, you're going to have the people there.
Okay, so the fast growth of the suburbanizing
the rapid
east side, that's
And
what
this,
shocked.
and this you understand spread over not just into highways, but into schools and education, one thing or another, because the same thing was going on on new school sites, which incidentally, a lot of them were benefiting from the authority to go out and buy their sites on a contract in advance. I'm very proud of that. I suppose there again, if you want to talk flash and splash, the Urban Arterial Program was probably one of the, and you'll understand when you read that, it was something that caught even the eye of the federal government. And it was the first time it was ever done. That would be the splashiest thing, but I'm just as proud of that bill to let cities and counties and school districts and park departments and one thing or another go out and buy and enter into real estate contracts.
I'd like to go back to Kirkland for just a couple more questions. Talked about your successes and the things that you're happy about. What would you do differently if you could do it again?
Well, I probably, even a rough pedal rolled downstream far enough gets smoothed out its edges, and I probably was, I'd probably be less abrasive. Now, I never thought of myself as being abrasive, but I'm sure there were a lot of people that thought I was abrasive.
Well, if you don't think you were, why are you sure other people perceived you that way?
Well, let me tell you one simple philosophy that I had. I think that my long suit in government was being innovative. The way we fixed the sidewalks in downtown Kirkland and the way we got the waterfront park for Kirkland and the highway programs and so forth. The other thing, besides being innovative, is that, and it probably will sound corny, but I consider myself a political Johnny Appleseed. Plant your trees as you go along and do what you can. And so I took on a lot of things that average legislator perhaps didn't give a damn about. But if you're here and you see a need and you can do something about it, then do it, and then go on. It may succeed, it may not succeed, but do it if you can and plant that tree there and go on to the next one. And that always was my philosophy in government.
What's an example of that in Kirkland?
Well, I would think again the waterfront part.
But if you had it to do again, you said that you would be less abrasive.
Well, I wasn't thinking in terms of projects. I was fairly young, you have to realize. I think I was about 27 or something. And so I lost my temper on occasions. I remember the East Side Journal Republic, or East Side Journal paper printing that the mayor blew like Mount Vesuvius. True story.
Were you impatient it seems as though...
Not with
Kirkland-
people.
Not with people,
Not
not
with
even
people.
with some of these old stick-in-the-muds.
No, I thought they had to be listened to. In fact, I thought I listened pretty good to people. Because I would have liked to have been listened to. And I think the same thing is applicable in the legislature. The constraints on my time the last 5 years I was in the legislature were enormous. And the Transportation Committee, as it is now called, has a responsibility for the entire highway department and construction program, the State Patrol, the Aviation Commission, the ferry system, the Department of Motor Vehicles, and a great many more. Then plus that, it's the only committee in the legislature that, and I believe it's still true, that handles their own budget. You see, schools or whatever it is, you know, it'll go through the appropriate committees and get to the Rules Committee, and it'll go to the Appropriations Committee. The highway bills did not go through the Appropriations Committee. It went directly to the Rules Committee and out onto the floor of the House.
Is that one reason that you got the kind of press we've alluded to, Asphalt Al and all that?
Well, you understand that we were fighting. The thing that sent me to the legislature in the first place was the Evergreen Point Bridge. And we got involved, and I say we, I'm speaking of the East Side communities, and there was an, for lack of a better term, an action committee formed of Bellevue and Kirkland people primarily, and a few from Redmond, and I think probably a few from Bothell. But we had people like Kemper Freeman Sr., and we had several, Harry Olson, who was in real estate in downtown Kirkland, and Maury Powell, and was on the committee, and I was on the committee, and there was a real highway activist that the name escapes me at the moment, but he was from Kirkland.
It's
And
not Cummings, not
Pardon?
Cummings, Cummings
No.
or King. No.
He was, as I recall, was an electrician. But in any event, he was very active, and he was very active on a statewide basis. And but we had a gentleman that was probably the top banker in Bellevue at the time, Wheeler Coy, was active on the committee, and I think Dorothy Lister was, and
Realtor.
Bert McNay. You know, it was a fairly good committee, and the stratagem of the Seattle people is that they'd press a site, let's say the Sandpoint site,
For a bridge.
for a bridge. And when we got them blocked into a corner with that one, then they'd jump all the way back down the lake to a parallel bridge. And then we'd get them back in the corner on that one, then they'd jump back up to the Sandpoint Bridge, one thing or another.
Well, Mr. Leeland,
So they-
why were they so reluctant to have a second bridge built? Was it disruption to Seattle neighborhoods that was the issue? What was
No,
it? Or was it-
it's the God Almighty dollar. It's downtown business.
But how did
Why
it
do you
hurt
think? Why do you think
downtown
today?
business?
Why do you think today that the mass transit proposals don't produce any direct metro transit to?
Understand. How did it help downtown Seattle business interests for there to be only one bridge over Lake Washington?
Well,
And
I
not
think if they
two?
could have sunk it, they'd have sunk it. I'm serious. They didn't want the competition, and you can see what's happened to downtown
The
Seattle.
competition of Bellevue Square?
Right. And they knew there were going to be other Bellevue squares and other shopping centers and other shopping centers. And if you get a chance, or ever have the opportunity in this particular field, and you're interviewing people on the east side, find out how many of them go downtown Seattle anymore to shop. They had a very vested financial interest in holding the east side back. And if Seattle had had the final say on whether we got that second Lake Washington Bridge, we'd never had it. Mm-hmm. But you see, it became a statewide issue in the whole state and the state legislature. And did you know, for example, that after years and years and years, and incidentally, the reason I got sent to the legislature is that, right, wrong, good, or bad, I got selected to be the spokesman for the TV debates and this and that and the next thing.
For the second bridge.
For the second bridge. And the interviews and before the Chamber of Commerce, so on and so forth. And they, after, this has been months and months and months and months and years of fighting the Evergreen Point Bridge, they thought they finally had it. They came up with a court decision that only the University of Washington Board of Regents could approve the right-of-way through the Arboretum. Mm-hmm. And they thought they had us. And it wasn't my decision. I wasn't that smart. But it was Julia Butler Hanson, who was at that time chairman of the House Transportation Committee and the most powerful chairman that there ever was in that committee in this state. I think she rivaled the governor in power. Actually, she was a masterful politician, but she had the raw bone guts when it came to it, boy. And she was a Democrat, and she ran her committee like with a fair, but without any detours around here and there. But anyway, the way we finally got the bridge is that we enacted special legislation by the state legislature, where the legislature authorized and directed the University of Washington Regents to put that, stand aside for that road. Special act of legislature. Oh, that would make a fascinating research project.
It would. I think, isn't it Governor Rossellini, a Democratic governor, who supported the second bridge?
Well, and without him, we wouldn't have had it.
Yeah, received a reluctant thanks of the Bellevue American, which was a staunchly Republican paper, saying, "Well, we hate to say it, but got to pat Rossellini on the back for this."
True story. And he got his reward, the name of the bridge after him.
That's right.
But
well, did you continue to have any interest in Kirkland politics after you left? Mayor Bagley and his trials and tribulations?
It's inescapable that you would for a period of time, but in I think it was 1966. I think I told you earlier that I had a World War II marriage that didn't work out, and I was following that divorce. I was single for 18 years during the time I was mayor and one thing and another. And I married my present wife in 1964, I think, and we moved to Redmond. And I was still in the legislature, and I was active, and chairman of the committee and so forth. And so
So did you get involved in Kirkland Forward, and what did you think about hiring a city manager? I mean, those ideas
Well,
are in the air.
we had, we had many battles in the early days over whether to have a city manager or not.
Oh, we did. Tell me about that.
Oh yes, we did, I would say that the thing that put city manager in Kirkland on hold was my election to city council and mayor. Because the council and so forth, we represented a different viewpoint, and we were opposed to the city manager form of government. And people knew it when they elected us. And that killed or set back city manager. And I think there was only one mayor after me before they put the city manager through.
What was the ideological basis, or was it a practical basis for your opposition to the city manager?
Well, I'll tell you, it's very simple. I feel that people take too little interest and too little participation in their community and government now. And that this idea of hiring somebody to run everything for you, I thought that a strong mayor, council form of government, there would be more community leadership and more get up and go than there would be under a city manager form of government. And I still believe that way. However, it's interesting to note that there was this huge swing, to the city manager form of government nationwide in an awful lot of places. And now I've read in recent year or two that there's starting to be a swing backward away from city manager. But you can't have your cake and eat it too. I think that the natural spokesman and community leader for a city is the mayor.
Someone who is elected.
Right. He's elected, and he's there, and he's in the front, and he has some authority too. And I think it's far more from a leadership standpoint. How many city managers do you know that are ever great leaders? Are out in front a whole lot.
Well, I can think of a couple, but I can think of some who are not. It seems to me to be a matter of personality. But.
Well, I think it's the nature of the job. And I think that, but by the same token, I'd have to say, if you asked me today, I'd say that unfortunately, you might as well have a city manager form of government because the people are not active anymore.
Well, tell me. I mean, were your city council meetings? Was there a lot of attendance?
Well, we had pretty good attendance. Yeah, we had pretty good attendance.
What's pretty good? How many people would come out to a council meeting?
Well, it would depend on what it was. I can remember my initial meeting as mayor. I had there wasn't even standing room in the city hall. But I'd say that, in all fairness to accuracy, that 20, 25 people, actual citizens, would be a good turnout.
When the people voted you and your cohorts in, they knew that you opposed city manager form of government.
I would think so.
What changed everybody's mind when they, after Bagley's administration, it seems as though people pretty much changed their minds. I mean, is it Mayor Bagley who's the persuader here?
Well, Mayor Bagley believed in the city manager form before he ever became mayor. And I don't think, and I've always felt this way,
Yes.
that the issue really wasn't city manager versus mayor. I think there were some purists like Al King and,
Purist.
well, you know, governmental in a purest sense of efficiency and so forth that believed in the city manager form of government. But I think it really was a move to control the power of the town. And I'll always believe that because, see, we came out of, when I say we, I'm talking about Vern Burmester that had the furniture store and Dr. Carl Schneider, the veterinarian, and Bob Gardner and Chick Underwood and myself and Ed Oban. We were fresh faces, and we all thought pretty much alike. And that's one reason we got along so good. And there wasn't any chance of city manager as long as we were around and in power. And I'm going to say this because I believe it, but I'm not saying it in a derogatory sense. I think that Bagley was elected the mayor to do exactly what he did, get the city turned into city manager.
Is that right? So sort of a cat's paw.
I really do.
Well, what's the ulterior motive of the Kirkland Forward people?
Well, you understand that there was a power clique always run the town, you know, and controlled it.
No, I don't know. I mean,
Well, the Leroy Johnsons and the from behind the scenes influence, Dick Everest, very good friends of Leroy Johnson. They were all very close to friends.
how about Guy Farrar?
Harold, the fellow that had the drugstore.
Not Coleman.
No, not Coleman. It was the one with the kitty corner across the street on the lakeside. I want to say Harrelson, but I don't think that was it.
But Harold's somebody who owned the drugstore.
Yeah.
How about Farrar?
Well, Farrar was in that group of influence that was very close, and they were very close socially too. You understand?
But they didn't run for office.
No, they might have at one time. You understand? They might have at one time, but they were above that. And I don't mean that in a derogatory sense. They were the puppeteers up here.
Were they puppeteering you? Or were they
No.
puppeteering the people you replaced?
I think they had been people that we replaced. But see, we had pretty much of a clean sweep. The people I just mentioned, Burmester and Schneider and Oban and Underwood and Gardner and myself and we and Ann Oban. I don't mean Ann Oban. I mean Alice Coleman. They sure as hell didn't control us, and I don't think they even tried.
And you represented a new breeze coming through. You left, and Bagley becomes mayor and goes back to these older ways of...
I would think so. I would think so. You know, there were some of the other people that had, you know, dropped out because they had businesses to run or they had enough of it. There's a fellow that used to run the mercantile store, I guess you'd call it mercantile. And he used to, you know, the bunch of the downtown people, you know, they'd congregate for coffee in the morning. And Vern Burmester would go. He had the furniture store. And this fellow that I'm speaking of, I think it was Richardson is his name. He would never fail. This is what Burns would tell me. He'd never get in there in the morning except Richardson would rush up to him and said, "What are you sons of bitches doing now?" I mean, that's the way he was greeted. That, and you know, it's just not a hostility.
No.
What are you sons of bitches doing now? Or what did you do last night? You know, and without even asking, you know, for what was the issue or what was both sides of it, so forth. Well, and there are others like that. You understand?
How arrogant.
And you so you see, you know, you didn't pay anything for being city council, you know.
But why would folks like that want a city manager? Surely you're not saying he would be easier for them to control.
Well, I think you understand when I talk about control, I'm talking about a group that were experts at finessing the situation. You understand? They would control the city manager with finesse. Or perhaps be it social or financial gain or one thing or another, investment-wise or one thing or another, they would approach it that way, I would think. I don't think they'd approach it with a broad axe.
So it was very
But we're
subtle.
talking about people that was their mode of operation, was really finessing something. And I'm talking about Leroy and Dick Everson, and of course he was the biggest brain of all of them. I always got pretty good advice and pretty good
Everest?
yeah.
Everest. You said Everson. I just
No,
wanted to be-
Everest.
Everest.
He was around the University of Washington for a lot of years.
And is Al King?
Harrelson,
What
I
is-
think Harrelson
Harrelson?
was the
the
druggist,
druggist
but anyway, and Guy Farrar, and these were people that, you know, they didn't indulge in shouting matches and cussing you out or one thing or another. They operated on a very high level, and they finessed the situation.
Well, where does someone like Al King fit in?
Well, Al King floated in and out of all of these groups. He was an attorney, and he was rather independent. He had his opinions, and
You called him a purist.
I always respected Al King and Mary. Mary and I used to have some heart chats when she was the judge and I was the mayor about letting the way she would treat sentencing on certain types of it. You know, maybe that was her prerogative. You know, it wasn't mine. But I got my nose into it a few times.
Well, let me let you go. I'd like to thank you for a wonderful interview.